Good morning, 20 to 6, Talk Radio. I'm Erol Morkoc. Hope you're okay this morning and you are well. Stepping into Sunday morning. Ingrid Tarrant will be with us just after 6 this morning to rip us through the Sundays. We'll have a look at what's going on from her point of view. Lots and lots, quite a few news stories actually kicking about once you peel back the Dominic Cummings headlines. Also this morning, we are, of course, keeping an eye on America and Donald Trump's continued efforts to mount legal challenges. They are striking increasingly desperate turns this week, and President-elect Joe Biden has wasted no time in building his team. He's built a coronavirus task force that doesn't have any of his children on it, if you can believe. I know, incredible. Or if they do, they look very different to him. The Republican Party are coming to consider life after Trump. There's a reality that we have to deal with, right? The Republicans and the GOP are starting to deal with the reality of what comes next. And so there are some big questions in this. What does that look like? Is there an obvious candidate to take on the baton? Does Trumpism die with Trump's political career? Right? So let's ask these questions. What is Trumpism without Trump? And what next for the Republicans? Let's speak to Erol Morkoc now, who is from Republicans Overseas. We're also going to have Morgan Schondelmeyer with us shortly as well. She's the head of external affairs at the Adam Smith Institute, but I think we're struggling to get Morgan on the line. We'll do that shortly, hopefully. Let's speak to Erol first, though. Erol, hello, good morning.
Hi, good morning. How are you?
I'm very well, sir. I'm really, really well. Erol, how concerned are you about the vacuum that Donald Trump leaves in the Republican Party?
I'm not too concerned at all. I mean, maybe contrary to how some people are viewing it, I don't believe that Trumpism is only tied to Donald Trump. It's a lot bigger. He was a flag bearer for a national identity that perhaps wouldn't go quietly into the night, as how his supporters saw it. And they saw him not yielding to rapid and inconsiderate global influences that his supporters felt were infringing upon their national sovereignty. And in doing that, he inspired an entirely new generation who, they see it as making impossible possible. You saw a re-inspiration of more mainline traditional voters who originally had saw America, slipping away.
He has been a very powerful flag bearer, hasn't he, Errol? But it's always felt a bit more about the flag bearer than the flag, hasn't it? And I'm looking at life without that particular flag bearer, wondering if there's any life in it at all.
Well, I guess it depends on your perspective, right? So people in the party don't see it that way. They don't see it as a cult of Donald Trump, as perhaps it seems like on the outside with the adoring fans. They see it as a shared ideology. But more to your second point, if you think Donald Trump is going away, I'm sorry to say that he's not. There's going to be geared up, as you see with these lawsuits that are pushing towards a contingent election. If he is able to, or if he's not able to actually secure victory in 2020, you're going to see him run in 2024 if he wants to. If he decides, like, I've had enough of this, I'm going to go about my life, he's more than welcome to. But he seems to enjoy a good fight, and he gets to walk away, if he does lose, with the greatest economic numbers, the greatest metrics you can hope for.
Okay.
3 or 4 years.
Okay.
In those.
Okay, but he also lost, I suppose, didn't he? And I think there's only really one case in history, isn't there, of a president running for a second term 4 years later. Let's bring Morgan in now. Morgan Schondelmeyer is with us from the Adam Smith Institute. Morgan, the grip of Trumpism is really tight. I mean, you heard Errol there very enthusiastically defending Trumpism within his party. Do you see moderates being able to win any ground back, even if they want to try?
Good morning, first of all. And I think that what we saw in the election is down ballot Republicans did perform better than Donald Trump. And that maybe is a sign that there is some agreement with Trump movement. But I don't agree that you can separate Trumpism from Trump. I think the personality aspect of it is probably at least 60%. And since Trump has lost and has been comporting himself in such a odd manner after the election, like you said in the intro, mounting legal challenges, he's not likely to win. You have seen a lot of down-ballot Republicans kind of gently distancing themselves. I don't think they want to distance themselves too far because, again, a lot of his policies were popular, but you just can't have a figure like Donald Trump really running the Republican Party for much longer if it wants to last.
Erol makes the point, though, Morgan, that Trump has sort of tapped into something here that's won a lot of support. This anti-globalism, nationalism. It's won support within his party. It's won support in America. I mean, there is a majority against it. It's worth saying. So we concluded from last week. But ultimately, it is there, and the energy around the message is there. The question is, though, Morgan, does it matter if Trump isn't attached to that? If there's enough energy around what Trump has created, can somebody pick that up?
I think there is some energy, but there are also a lot of really bad policies that Trump was putting forward that a lot of traditional Republicans wouldn't subscribe to. He is not a Republican in a lot of ways. Personally, he doesn't have the actual social conservatism that most Republicans would espouse. But I think to your question about can someone pick up those policies, yes, and I think someone that doesn't have the kind of bombastic nature that Trump does could be a much more effective champion of these policies were they to get elected.
Okay.
Now, getting elected is hard without the Trump kind of personality.
This is the thing, isn't it, Errol? Trump is a perfect storm. He is a perfect storm of tapping into those sort of nationalist sensibilities, those anti-globalism sensibilities, whilst also having an incredibly, regardless of what you think of the guy, an incredibly powerful personality, an immense ability to cause chaos and upheaval that does quite well electorally. Not so much last week, but certainly in 2016. The problem is finding somebody who can also replicate that perfect storm, Errol. And I'm looking across the landscape, and I'm not really seeing anybody.
Yeah, you have a good point there, and also my colleague on the other side of the line here had a good point on the side of how much it is tied to Trump and how much you do have to wonder who could be that talisman. But you have to keep in mind it's all about image management, right, if you want to break it down as a strategist. I mean, George Bush left with everybody hating him, and then you fast forward 10 years later, he's hugging Michelle Obama and whatnot. So, I mean, if somebody is a figure who perhaps is not as electable like Donald Trump in the long run, images can be changed. If you find another candidate inside the party, somebody who perhaps is unknown, and Donald Trump elevates him, I think you're going to find an unknown person, somebody who's out there. Because right now, you're right. There isn't a direct candidate you could point to outside of like the comedy of having Donald Trump Jr. run and like George Bush 2 kind of vibe or something like that. So really, there's nobody who I could point to.
How much of a problem is it that we're going to have a Biden White House as the backdrop for that over the next couple of years for Trump? Because it's all good and well being able to sort of sow those seeds of chaos if you have somebody like Obama in the White House, or you're facing an opposition like Hillary. But if Biden does as he intends and cools the temperature here, it's going to be a real problem for one of those people who wants to use that hostility and whip up that hostility to continue the energy of Trumpism.
Yeah, it'll be tough. It'll be tough because it's going to come down to pairing his record against Joe Biden, and that's where perhaps Mr. Trump feels that's where he's going to see a gain. You keep about the Dow Jones, right? You go from like 16 to 18,000 to 30,000. You have a lot of metrics that Joe Biden quite simply is going to either need to inject a bunch of quantitative easing into the economy to maintain, or natural ebbs and flows will pull it back. So natural economic tendencies are actually going to play into Trump's favor here, because in about year 6, you were going to see some slowdown in the growth that his administration had pumped. And he's going to leave Joe Biden perhaps standing there holding that, and he's going to be able to point to things like that and say, hey, 2-3 years ago, things were a lot better than they are now. Look at your 401k.
He's also going to be able to point to the coronavirus crisis, though, that's absolutely that's taken a hammer blow to the economy. And many people, clearly in the minds of a majority of Americans, point at Trumpism, Trump's personality and his populism as being such a disastrous handling of the coronavirus, and the consequences being heavily tied to him. Is that a problem for whoever picks up the baton of Trumpism?
Oh, it's a tough one because, his supporters look at Operation Warp Speed. I'm not going to go into the whole pro-Trump spiel here, but they look at what he did and they say, we like it. We saw his response. That was the response. That was a measured response. He didn't panic, yada, yada, yada. So
200,000 people are dead, Errol. 10n million cases in the last week. 10 million cases. I don't think anybody looks at that and thinks it's a bit of success, do they?
Look, you had Elon Musk come out today and said he had 2 positive and 2 negative cases. You have a lot of interesting cases. I'm not here to debate whether or not people are dying from COVID. I'm here to talk about
there's nothing to debate. People are dying from COVID.
How the candidate's going to use it.
You're right, Errol, because there's nothing to debate on that front, is there? Listen, Morgan, Errol makes the point there about Errol actually makes the point there about Trump picking up Trumpism, right? I mean, and saying that Trump could could happily and successfully run again in 2024. Is that feasible?
I think, he will be very old by then. And by very old, I mean, I think the same age Joe Biden is now, who is also too old. But I think if he spends the next 4 years cultivating his base, cultivating Trump TV or whatever it is he has planned, we could see him, and I don't disagree, appointing a successor. I don't really know that he'll run again, especially because I don't particularly think he wanted to be president in the first place. So I think if he finds himself still at the center of attention for the next 4 years, still enjoying his fandom, he'll be content with that and maybe won't run.
Right, okay. So it's a bit of a catch-22, that, I suppose, because if Trump continues to maintain the energy and the oxygen, that means that there won't be the space for a new Trump candidate to break through, I guess. The other problem, Morgan, that perhaps your side of the argument certainly have here is that building a consensus around a moderate candidate, or a moderate candidate speaking to the base that Trump has built up here, just feels utterly impossible. I mean, that feels like an absolutely massive mountain to climb in terms of finding the right personality who can drag the party back to the centre ground, if you will, or back to where it perhaps was previously. It just feels like an impossible mountain to climb.
Right. It would probably feel very disingenuous to see someone like, Nikki Haley going out there and doing rallies the same way Trump did and saying the same things that he has. But what Trump was very good at was he tapped into what his supporters who felt left behind, he was able to say what they couldn't say because he was a man of power. And he gave the voiceless a power by being willing to say what no former statesman ever would. But that is a unique factor of Trump. I don't know that we'll see that in a moderate candidate, because then they wouldn't be moderates. Yeah, right.
Right, and I suppose that plays into that perfect storm that Donald Trump created, doesn't it?
Exactly.
Errol, is it a problem for Donald Trump that he's going to spend the next couple of weeks kicking and screaming? There is no evidence for this fraud. They're losing quite badly in terms of court cases, and as much of a sort of sense of injustice as being built up, it is highly unlikely that will be delivered. Is that doing damage to Trump, to the Republicans, to his image?
Unlikely. If he was a traditional political candidate who, depended on this for his bread and butter as far as eating, it maybe, or if he was younger and this was his livelihood. But in this situation, not. And keep in mind, I'm not, here to press the point, but the media does not elect him. It is the electors, and there is such thing as a contingent election. Should on December 14, faithless electors in states like Wisconsin or Georgia or Arizona decide not to cast those electoral votes for Joe Biden. If you get under 270, then it goes to a contingent election in the House of Representatives, with each state getting one vote. So there are a lot of interesting things throughout history. You look at the 19th century, the election of Thomas Jefferson. You look at how John Quincy Adams defeated Andrew Jackson. It just isn't over yet, and that's a little bit of why this next 2 weeks is about casting that shadow of a doubt. If state legislatures feel that this election was not conducted in good faith, they might not send those electoral votes.
And does that, as an American, Errol, does that not concern you? What you've just said there is effectively that the will of the people could be overturned by faithless casters of those electoral college votes. And hysteria and uncertainty around an election around which there is absolutely no evidence for uncertainty is the order of play. I mean, that is just, we're talking about a Western democracy here, Errol. We're talking about the President of the United States. That's terrifying. That's indefensible, isn't it?
Well, I mean, it would be if it wasn't built into the actual documents that we govern our country by, right? That's part of the steam valve. If you can't get to that electoral agreement, it's actually within the republic. It is, however, but
it's still underhand, isn't it? It's still underhand.
Well, I mean, it's got historical precedent. It certainly is the way it's done, and you have to look at it in the sense that this is a federation of 50 states, and ultimately the state legislatures do have the right. I agree with you. It would be completely, in a lot of ways, seen as a completely underhanded tactic. But whether or not that's what they choose to employ, I'm not the guy. I'm not the guy deciding it. I'm just telling you how they're perhaps approaching it.
Sure. Okay. Errol, thank you so much for your time. Really nice to talk to you. Morgan as well. Really, really interesting perspectives. Thank you to you both, Erol Morkoc and Morgan Schondelmeyer as well. Morgan is the head of external affairs at the Adam Smith Institute. Errol from Republicans Overseas. We will watch, as ever. We will watch and we will see. And I don't think it's too soon to have that conversation. Errol kind of casted some doubts on it perhaps being too soon.